Okay, so I finished reading No Longer Human today, and I wanted to like ramble about it and talk about what I thought about it for some strange reason, but I've never done this before. But I wanted to share my thoughts on it, and I'm an English student in university, so normally I would share thoughts on a book in writing, but it's summer break, so this is a different way to express it. So it took me about 2 weeks to read, not because it's long, just because I put it off sometimes, but when I read the first like section, it's split into notebooks, which go through the ages of the main character. And after I finished the first one, I looked at some reviews of the book, and a lot of people complained about themes of misogyny. So I was kind of worried reading through it, but the theme of misogyny is used in a constructive way. So I wanted to talk a bit more about that. So the first notebook is when the protagonist is a child, and his whole stick to his character is that he doesn't view himself as human or like in a social way. That's my cat. 1 second. He doesn't view himself as human in a social way or conform to the social structures around him as a child. Like he doesn't understand why families eat together and talk together at the table. He doesn't enjoy that, or like the structure of 3 meals a day, which I kind of relate to him in that sense as like an autistic person, because some of the like random social structures don't entirely make sense to me, but other people just follow along with them as if they're normal without questioning them, and he kind of goes into questioning them more and more. But it's really the only thing I can relate to him on. He goes through a much darker path down his idea of not being in society as he grows up. So mostly as a kid, yeah, he just complains about these things around him he doesn't understand. He never has a want for anything. He does well in school, but he doesn't feel great about it. He doesn't receive the love from his parents that he needs. Cat again. He just in general doesn't feel satisfied as a child, even as a child, with whatever needs he has. He tries to fit in once when his father goes into Tokyo and is getting gifts for him and his siblings. Uh, when he first asks, he doesn't like want anything, so he says nothing when he asks what he wants. But he sneaks in later to his father's room and writes in the notebook something that his father suggested, and that pleases his father, but it doesn't please him because, again, he doesn't truly want anything. He doesn't truly want this thing, but he does it to fit in, and that goes into his main form of communication, which he calls clowning. He puts on a display, acting funny or trying to make people laugh with emotions he doesn't really have, and that's how he works around social situations. Like if a sibling visits his room, he doesn't truly want to speak to them, but he needs to conform in some way to that he seems normal to them. So he'll put on some sort of show or tell a story, anything to make himself look normal. So then he goes into his high school and college years, and he continues the clowning, trying to fit in, getting along with others, despite not truly, again, feeling human. He ostracizes himself by referring to others as like the human species, human beings. He doesn't ever refer to himself in that way. But then he meets a person, Takichi, who sees through his act. He does a thing in gym class, and Takichi comes up to him. He's like, "Oh, I know that was fake. Like that was a joke, not in a harmful way, but he views this as like one of the most harmful things he's ever had done to him in his life, because being seen as like through his act is like the worst thing to him. He doesn't want to have to perform past the act he's been doing for all of his life." But he actually ends up going home with this like person. They become sort of friends, in the sense that he like puts on an act of being friends. He never thinks he's friends with them because he doesn't think he can form connections with people. He mostly is friends with him at first because he wants to reinvigorate the idea that he is the clown. Like he is what he's putting on the act to Takichi, trying to make him believe it. But Takichi doesn't really care because it's not the big of a deal to him. But to the protagonist, it's the biggest deal he's ever had in his life. Takichi doesn't really provide much to the protagonist. It's mostly a couple lines he says. He says the protagonist is like really handsome and a lot of women will fall for him, and he takes that into his future, and it predicts a lot of like issues he comes with. He has a lot of problems with women in his adult life, which we'll get into later. And he has a prediction of him being a great artist because him and Takeshi talk about art a lot, and the project is showing Takeshi his art. It's like Takeshi really likes the art, and it pursues him, like it motivates him to go into art school, which is one of the only things he ever really wanted to do of his own volition in life. The rest of the things he kind of just did to fit in, but he seemed to actually enjoy doing the art. So let me just find another point to talk about. I have some stuff in mind, but I want to like make sure I'm not skipping anything in order. Okay, so yeah, another thing on the painting, he doesn't enjoy how artists only depict things that are pretty. He wants to be an artist that depicts realism. He wants to paint things that are seen as ugly or displeasurable to look at because he wants his art to be honest and real. Trying to move on to the part where he gets in his adult life, because there's more to talk about in his adult life. As a kid, it's mostly just him not fitting in, and I've read to mention he goes through a bit of a sexual trauma with his like the maids, I guess, butlers that work at his house because his family's rich. There's a small line stuck in there about him being shown things he shouldn't when he was young, which can be interpreted in many ways, but most interpret it as some sort of sexual experience that he was forced upon him as a child. Okay, so when he gets into art school, he's obviously very advanced in his studies because he doesn't care for anything, so he would need to have that natural talent to actually be pass through high school. He doesn't attend his classes in college. He just does his work, his exams, shows up for them. He does great. Then he meets a guy in his college class. He doesn't ever go out of his way, but this guy approaches him and asks him for, I believe it was some money. He asks him for 5 yen, and they end up going out for liquor, which he hasn't previously experienced. He never seeks out experiences, so everything that's brought upon him is a product of someone else's intervention. Like the art was a product of Takeshi telling him he liked the art. As a child, the mask he got from his father was a product of his father telling him he wanted it, and this liquor is because Hariki introduced him to liquor. So Hariki provides him basically his adult lifestyle at the start. They go around to bars, and Hariki takes care of his funds, making sure they're spent well for like travel and pleasure. He doesn't view Hariki as a friend. Like, he doesn't view anyone as a friend, but he openly states to the notebook that he's writing, he's just used Hariki as someone who brings him pleasure and things to do. Like, he really enjoys being drunk in liquor, which is one of the few things he actually states that he enjoys about human life, even though he doesn't view himself as human. He never enjoys social interactions or connections. He doesn't enjoy women, which we'll get into later, but alcohol and one other thing, which we'll get into later, is really the only two things he ever stated brings him any sort of joy. He always had fear over money, which, because he never had much of an income, he always relied on either his father or whoever was around him, and he felt so detached from his father that getting the money was always a struggle. So as he hangs out with Hariki more, he becomes more and more addicted to alcohol, smoking, and going to see prostitutes, because they find that it's an escape from him for human beings. He fears humans because he doesn't think he is one. He doesn't want to participate in their dread of daily life going about and having all these problems. He has his own problems, but he views them in a different sense than human issues. He always like laments about how people would view his issues as meaningless, as he can still go on living, he can choose to be successful, but he doesn't, because he doesn't care. So getting into this, he gets more into misogynist themes when he talks into prostitutes, but he states he doesn't see them as human like him, but he also doesn't see them as women. He believes they're imbeciles, but it's the only people he at the moment could feel safe with. It's dehumanizing to call them imbeciles and not human, obviously, but to him, I don't know if that's really what his intention is, because he views himself as not human, which is obviously self-deprecating, but he doesn't seem to exactly hate himself, so it's almost like he's relating these people to him, but he does view himself as intelligent and not them. So he relates to them in one way, but he doesn't want to spend extended periods of time with these prostitutes. He takes them as pleasures like alcohol. They're only temporary. Okay, we find another section. Okay, so then Hariki introduces him to a communist group that Hariki only attended once, but the protagonist ends up attending regularly after the first meeting as something to do outside of his studies, because he doesn't go to school, so he needs something to occupy himself. He goes to these meetings and he clowns for them. He puts on his performance. He tries to gain their favor, which he succeeds in doing. He ends up being a pretty crucial member of the club and helps them on different jobs and does different things for them. But he never holds the values they do regarding like communism, and just he has no actual care for their mission. He just keeps going to this to view outwardly to others and to himself that he's doing something, which he doesn't. He loses this care of looking outwardly. She's coming up. Looking outwardly good to others and to himself. He keeps attending the meetings, and he feels that even in a group full of social outcasts, as they say they are, he is still an outcast. From the moment he was a child, he never felt a part of anything, and he doesn't ever feel a part of anything. He doesn't have this revelation. There's no joy in the book, but it doesn't, at the same time, it doesn't try to impose this depressing reality onto the viewers of the book or anyone else. It doesn't present his way of life as something to pursue or to be or to aspire to. It takes him in an honest form, but also cautious. Doesn't want you to be like him, but it doesn't want to provide any mistruth as to who he was, because it's a partly autobiographical of the author, but there's also fiction in there. So he doesn't want to misrepresent himself or the character he creates. So then let's find another section. Okay, so he goes more into why he goes to the group. It's because he enjoys the rationality of him being there. He, again, doesn't care for the group, but he finds that the world he's created for himself is irrational, and it makes him feel more relaxed than being in a rational world. He is able to do what's expected of him, which is like participate in something, be someone, but he does this in an irrational sense. No one would think, like from his upbringing or who he was, he would enjoy like communism or the idea of it. But it's a way for him to, again, appear normal, and even the people in the group think he's normal to their cause. He thinks that he's sympathetic to them, but he's not. He's, again, just putting on more of an act and and continuing to deceive people around him. Alright, let me move on further. I'm looking for more parts where he meets women, because there's a lot more to talk about in that sense. Okay, so he goes to a cafe and meets a server there, and he's poor, so he goes there in hopes someone's going to give him something for free, and the server gives him liquor without having to pay for it. And going here, she doesn't give him the sense that he has to put on an act. He doesn't have to pretend to be happy. She can be content in serving him and being near him, with him being the depressed self he is. So he opens that fact to a person for the first time and just drinks himself into a stupor. Afterwards, he leaves with her, and this goes to the misogyny. It shows his distaste for people, but also women. He doesn't even remember this girl's name. He's a significant person in his life, but the only thing he can remember of the night is what happened, and he can remember the face of the old man that served him sushi at a bar and the sushi, how it tasted, but he can't remember the name of the woman who is a very significant part of his life. They go on to go back home together, and then they spend the night together. He again finds joy in the fact that he can be himself around her, doesn't have to clown around her, even though early on it seems he enjoys the clowning act, but I think as it goes on, he gets tired of it. He doesn't want to keep this up, but at the same time, he doesn't want to do anything, So he finds her relatable in the fact that they're both not putting on an act of happiness. They admit they're sad in their lives. And the woman admits she's married, but her husband's in jail. So they end up easing each other's unhappiness almost, but he doesn't want to let himself be that vulnerable. He doesn't want to open himself to harm from another human being, because again, he's terrified of human beings, doesn't view himself as one. He ends up spending the night there. He admits it was a night of happiness. He was actually enjoying something in his life for once, which he admits is so strange for him. He puts in brackets, he's like, I will never use something so direct and joyful ever again to describe something, and he doesn't. He was so scared of the fact that he felt pure joy that he leaves her. He leaves her without letting her know he's gone. Talking about how being poor makes love not last, and he is poor, so I guess he uses that expression as an excuse to continue to run away from any sort of obligations to love he has. So after leaving her for a bit, he just goes on with his useless life. He doesn't do anything. He ends up meeting up with Hariki again. After a month of being apart from her, they don't see each other. Like, he avoids the cafe and seeing her. He kind of copes with the fact that he doesn't want to see her. He doesn't want to admit that he's scared of it. So he copes and says, like, women have this trait to where they separate their night and day lives, and that he was part of the nightlife of the woman he met, and so there was no possibility that she would care for him the days. So he wanted to separate himself from the fact without being hurt, but he just makes this stuff up. Like, he presumes a lot what other people think of him, which that's relatable in a sense, but he goes so far to it and really drives a nail in that women are like this different species to him, which he does it. All humans are different species to him, but he never specifies anything about men, which again, I can see the complaints of misogyny, but it works in his character and doesn't, because his character is someone you shouldn't want to be. It's helping describe how terrible a person he is, but at the same time how damaged he is. So him and Hariki again meet up after a month. They go out for a night and they go into the cafe where she works. She sits with Hariki instead of the protagonist, and so another girl sits with the protagonist who isn't important. But he was shocked that she didn't sit with him and that Hariki was going to kiss and be with this woman. But he goes back to the fact that he doesn't care for things. He doesn't care to possess things or own anything. He doesn't feel like he's lost her because he never had her. He tries to, he doesn't make relations with humans or people. So one being quote unquote taken from him, that fact doesn't exist because he's never had anyone. But he feels bad for her because he still doesn't view Hariki as a friend. He thinks he's a fundamentally strange and brutal person, even though he's not that evil. He's just like, a miscreant of the night, drinking and going to prostitutes, But Haruki doesn't end up kissing her because he takes on that quote that the protagonist says of poverty driving love at the window. He views this woman and her looks as impoverished, so he doesn't want to be associated with him, which is weird because Haruki isn't that well off, but it affirms the delusions of the protagonist, which is an interesting thing to do because he does not need to be affirmed of any of that. It's awful, but he is anyways. So he, rejects her advances or doesn't advance on her and just asked for free liquor, which he ends up getting. The protagonist feels so bad for the Suniko because even in the eyes of someone like Hariki, someone who's just a drunkard, he's technically in poverty as well, just not as bad as some other people, wasn't good enough for him. This resonated with him deeply because again he views himself as a poor person and capable of love, and seeing that in another person, he drinks more than he ever has. And after that night, let me just check, I believe he feels pity and love for Tsuniko, which is weird for him to admit, but it's a faint, fleeting love, doesn't exist really. It's just a feeling he has in the most drunk moment of his life. He passes out and vomits. And then he wakes up in Suniko's house. And she takes to his advice of love flowing out the window when poverty comes in, because she's just experienced that. She thought it was a joke, but he's like, she reaches out to him and says like, is this really true? You know, this sucks. I don't like life, just like he doesn't like life. So both of them being comfortable around each other, he doesn't like expressing himself in a lot of words. She doesn't do that as well. She speaks the word death to him, and they reflect on like the botherumness of life, money, earning money, studying, being emotional, and he doesn't want to go on living, neither does she. So they both make the proposal of a suicide pact. Basically, both of them resolute that they're both going to die. So they go out for lunch in the morning, get lunch and whatnot. And at the lunch, she wants him to pay because she gave him free liquor and whatnot at the store. Not a repaying the debt thing. She just like, for fun, it's like, hey, you pay for this. But he has 3 copper coins to his name. He can't afford it, and even she's shocked by how little he has. And the fact that someone also in poverty was so shocked at how impoverished he was cut him deeply, and this severed any attachment he had to life. He was completely determined to kill himself. In the pact, like before, he might have had some fleeting idea of, oh, I want to live, or I care to do this, even though he doesn't really care about much. But he never expressed the need to die before now. But after he sees how impoverished and meaningless he is to others, he decides, you know, that's it, I'm done. So they both enter the water in a sea, and she drowns, but he is saved. He doesn't end up dying here. That was his first suicide attempt, and it was his first failed suicide attempt. But since they went in together, he looks like a criminal. So cops come and get him. He gets confined in a prison. He's questioned and whatnot about all of this. Let me get past this part, because it's mostly just him being questioned, detained. He puts on like his clowning show for the cops to show up with care, get on their good side. He lies about the severity of his illness. He has one of his lungs is flooded, I think, or something, and he pretends to cough up blood by getting blood up from a pimple under his ear, and uses this to put himself in better standing in the prison. And this is important because most people believe this fake cough and stuff, but as he's being examined by the district attorney, he ends up having a real cough because he does have an injury, but he plays up this cough extra and makes sure to show the blood on his handkerchief to the district attorney. And for the second time, someone sees through his act. They ask him like, oh, is this real? Like, it's believable, and they innocently ask, is it real? You know, like Takechi, back when he was a kid, it was like an act he put on in gym class. You know, acting like it's fake is not a big deal. And this, he didn't even say like, oh, that's fake. The attorney just asked him, was that real? Because, you know, he's got to question these people. They're all trying to get something out of it. But he again views this as one of the worst moments in his life. This was worse than the high school. He plummeted into like the worst despair he's ever been. Which is weird because he just had a suicide attempt, you know, like that. He caused the girl he loved to die, and he survived. That survivor's guilt should be eating at him much more than a police officer finding out he's faking his injury. He's faking the severity of his injury. I'm just watching for the cat. She likes to jump up. So he gets bailed out of jail by someone, his father's friend. ends up living in his place for a bit. He works out a cartoonist magazine. He's keeping up with his art, but he doesn't do it in the same sense. You know how you wanted to depict ugly things, he wanted to depict reality. He's a cartoonist now, which isn't true to his story, but he needs to make money because he's expelled from college due to being on suspect of murdering the girl in the suicide attempt. He's kept in the top floor of this guy's apartment, and there's a store on the bottom floor, but he's confined in there almost like a prison because Flatfish, the guy who bailed him out, is so worried that something would happen to him. He doesn't so much as care for him, he just doesn't want the burden of him killing himself to be put on him. So living trapped up there goes on for a while until he's invited down for a supper, which is not, it's a higher quality than what they normally eat, so he assumes that Flatfish must have won the lottery or something. And he asked the protagonist what he wants to do in the future, which is a strange question because he doesn't ever care about the future. He doesn't want anything. He wants to be free from his isolation in the room, but he doesn't really have any dreams to pursue. But the question of what he wants to do in the future is what would free him, because Flatfish wants him to have a future. He doesn't trust in the protagonist to continue on living, like not kill himself unless he has something to work to. To the question, he just keeps asking Flatfish what does he want him to do, but Flatfish wants him to have something he wants, but he never has had something he wants. The thing he's ever really wanted was to die, but he seems to have lost that resolution to die for now. He's just in a stupor of unwanting of anything, but Flatfish needs him to want something in order to trust him to be free. So he finally finds some conviction to have something to want because he wants to be free, and he answers with the fact that he wants to be a painter. But Flatfish thinks this is a joke. He thinks this unmotivated suicidal person, why would they ever want to pursue a career so difficult and unfinancially promising as being a painter? So he laughs at him, and the protagonist takes this deeply and personally. He thinks this laugh had depths of thousands of fathoms. This is the kind of weird shadow he might find hovering there at the bottom of the sea. It's Flatfish. I believe he's more of a lighthearted character. He doesn't actually think the protagonist is stupid for wanting to be a painter. He just thinks it's out of character and not promising as a career. But the protagonist, again, he's so self-deprecating in anything that he does that when someone outwardly views it as wrong or weird, like his axe being broken by the district attorney or Takechi in high school, he thinks this is like the worst thing anybody's ever done to him. So he decides he's going to leave his confinement for a bit. He doesn't want to worry Flatfish because he still doesn't want to worry people. He doesn't want that burden. So he goes to Hariki's house. He leaves a note and goes over there. So going to Hariki's house, he finds that at home, Hariki is a much different person. He cares a lot for his family. He cares about his business as an artist. He submits stuff to a magazine. He doesn't want Hariki there. The protagonist there. Hariki doesn't want him at this house. It's like a bad time for him. He's very self-conscious of his belongings. The protagonist begins playing with a couch cushion and unraveling it, and Hariki gets really mad. It's just so weird. To the protagonist, it's a weird juxtaposition of who Hariki actually is to him, because to him he's this night-dwelling delinquent that goes to bars and goes to prostitutes, but in the day at home he is a kind young man who has a promising job, which kind of, now I think about, plays into his idea of women of being different in night and day life. But it doesn't apply to women, it applies to Hariki in reality. But he doesn't ever see that for some reason, probably because of his misogynist tendencies. So the woman that collects the prints that Hariki makes for the newspaper and stuff comes over, and she's concerned for the protagonist, and she lives near Flatfish where he's staying, so they head in the same direction. And she pities him because he looks sad, depressed, that goes into the prediction that Takeshi made as a kid, that women fall for him easily, and that seems to hold true. So he goes over to her place for a while. He cares for her daughter, and there's a scene where he looks out the window and sees a kite trapped by wires, and it's ripped and dusty, but it clings to the wires. I took that as sort of his weak connection to life, or people in general, maybe how he views their connection to life, because he views life as troublesome, bothersome. He doesn't like living, but he also doesn't want the burden of dying. He and the other people around him, they cling to life despite its troubles and damages to the person. So I think the kite is either, to himself, it's him holding on, or other people or society like holding on despite all the troubles that life gives. He then remembers, like, he believes his heart's better than Hariki's, and he thinks back to the pictures he drew in high school. He's so sad he's lost these pictures. It's one of the rare occurrences where, again, he holds attachments to something. He wants something and he feels like he's lost it. He feels he owned and cared for these things, but they got lost in a move. And he was sad that he can't prove his betterment than Hariki. His relationship with Hariki changes now in like the next couple of pages. And she believes it's a joke that he's better than Hariki because she enjoys Hariki's art. It gets published, but he does cartoons now for money. So he shows her the cartoons and she enjoys them, and they end up getting published in a monthly magazine for children. So he has some sort of income to spend, and he spends it on liquor because he's still very much so an alcoholic. And she goes on to talk about how his depressed looks and terribly lonely looks only make women want to help him more, which is unfortunate for the women because this guy doesn't deserve their help. You can be sympathetic for him and his issues, but in the end, he is a bad person. He doesn't reach out to people in the way he should. He just takes advantage of them, or like later on, to get more money for booze, he takes this woman's clothes and sells it at pawn shops and stuff like that. Okay, so then they get married, him and the woman, just kind of out of the blue, but he doesn't think much of it because he doesn't care for these relations. They get married at the suggestion of Flatfish and Hariki and her, so he's just like, okay, sure, I'll go along with this. I got a job, I got somewhere to stay. He seems to enjoy her to some extent, but he doesn't get any more happy for this. He just continues to buy booze and cigarettes and go about day by day without wanting or caring. He enjoys the girl's daughter, though. The daughter calls him dad and asks him a question if that God will grant anything if you ask for it. And he wishes that was true. He wants God to answer his prayers, if God exists. He doesn't really believe in. He goes into I'll go into this. Let me do this in order. So he tells her that, like, oh, God will grant anything you want, but he doesn't listen to me. He's frightened by the idea of God and the fact that he doesn't believe he has any love. He only views his punishment. He cannot believe in heaven, only hell. He doesn't believe there's any sort of divine justice in the universe. From all the terrible things he sees, he can't view that as an outcome. And it goes, the daughter asks him, like, why won't God answer your prayers? And he says, because he disobeyed what his dad told him. Though he's like detached from his dad at this point, because his dad is so upset about the suicide attempt, and even before, like, his not attending classes and whatnot, that all go back to him. So he feels so disconnected and unloved by his father that this still sticks with him. He says that his father's the reason that God won't answer his prayers, even though his father's not there. He's gone. And the daughter's confused because he seems so nice, and he goes on by that how that he deceives people. They only think he's nice because they see the clowning. But then he asks her, what does she want from God? And she says that he wants her real dad back. And that destroys him. He felt some connection to this person, the child, as her place in father. The other father's in jail or dead or something at this point. He's not relevant. But he felt that, like, the daughter was an enemy of him. He finds her a stranger. He doesn't believe now that she was a safe person to be around. She is no longer a sense of happiness or security for him. So Hariki, again, later on, comes to visit and looks at the comic strips that he draws and tells him not to be overconfident in his work and stuff. And he wants to contest this with, again, his paintings that he's lost. He's like, oh, I have these paintings. They're, like, so much better than yours. But he continuously talks about how he can't work up the courage to hold an argument or to care enough to debate with someone. He just goes along with it. He's like, oh, don't be so mean to me, like, jokingly as a friend. But it's mostly with Hariki. There's many times he wants to hold some sort of discontent for this person and argue with them. He wants to show some sort of care for his work or things that he cares about, but he just can't do it for some apparent reason. He might just be not letting himself, because he doesn't want to form these connections, but maybe there's something truly holding him back from showing any appreciation for anything. Which I can sort of understand. Sometimes it's not worth arguing, but he does it in such a passive way that he goes about life entirely passive. He doesn't allow himself any attachments to life. It's like these paintings, he tells him, like, this is the worst thing he's ever lost. He wishes he had them. It's an undrank glass of absinthe for him that he wants to find so desperately. But even though they hold such a personal connection, he doesn't have the conviction to argue for their brilliance. And he goes on about how he doesn't, like, seeing Hariki in this light of the daytime, he reminds himself that no humans really know each other. They go about their lives thinking they're great friends, but failing to see the truth throughout their lifetime. So more of him depressing himself by saying, oh, I'm never going to be connected with someone. I'm never going to find someone who I'm allowed to be me with, And then he gets into the theme of society, which is a big theme for the protagonist. Hariki tells him, like, stop fooling around with women. You've gone far enough. Society won't stand for more. In a joking sense. It's not meant to be taken as Hariki hates him. and he talks about society, what it means. Like, doesn't mean the plural of human beings. He believes that it's something harsh, something to be fearful of. And in the moment, he views society, because Hiriki says society will punish him, or like won't stand for him being so cruel to women, which he should. He is very cruel to women, but he views society as Hiriki in the moment. He says that you're the one who won't stand for it. You're the one who make me suffer. You're the one who'll be ostracizing me, whatnot. So he takes society as an individual rather than the group it really refers to. So now that he understands to himself that society is the individual person's needs, or they're just framing their own opinions in a greater scale to make them seem more believable, this for some reason makes him more self-willed and not as scared to be a human as before, even though he's not a human, just participating in society, I guess. He stopped being acting like so nice to the people around him. He more outgoing as his own sense of uncaringness. Looking for more things. So he goes out in a true night drunken stupor and drinks tons and tons. It's the most since he had since before the suicide attempt. And to do so, he pawns his wife's clothes, which again shows how shitty he is. And he returns home quietly and hears the daughter and his wife talking. And they talk about how his drinking is because he's too good. That's what the wife says. He doesn't enjoy the liquor, but he does it too, for some reason. Even though he's a good person, he just drinks. But the wife shows the daughter a bunny gets for them, and he sees this, that the both of them, after his 2 nights of leading them, are happy. They're enjoying each other's presence. This innocent white bunny, untouched by him and the problems he brings, represents their happiness without him. So he's like, I'm a fool for getting in between them, which he is, and takes this as a reason to leave them permanently. So he went away, and he hasn't returned to this place. He ends up living in an apartment over a bar, which is the worst thing for him because he's addicted to alcohol. Trying to find the major plot points in these writings really quickly, but it takes me a minute, so apologize. So he kind of has a moment of being normal and joyful in this apartment up above the bar, probably because he's so close to alcohol. But he talks about how his fears before were stupid. He just compares humans to germs and stuff like that. The scientific method of fear. He's like, how many microbes are in a barber shop? How many parasites infest leather straps in subway cars? There's tapeworms and eggs and whatnot. But he accepts that there's accurate scientific fact that these germs do exist. But if you ignore all of them, you lose all possible connections with them and yourself. So he needs to understand that despite these risks, he has to allow these connections, and how illogical they are. Like, he brings up the statistic of if 10 million people leave 3 grains of rice left over from their lunch, it accumulates so much rice that you could feed another 1,000 people. But it's not possible to get this rice from these people. This hypothetical, while true, is not something that can happen in reality. So his abstaining from people to provide himself a better life or remove any sort of pain is illogical, as in it's true that he doesn't feel pain from others, but he's going to feel the pain from himself, and without connecting with others, he'll never be able to have any joy with them. Yes, he'll feel pain from them, but he'll never feel joy to take away from his own pain at the same time. So he realizes temporarily that he needs to open himself to this idea. Like, so he still has the idea that he's afraid of humans. He has to be drunk in order to believe in this idea that he needs to speak to people, talk to people, open to people, and drinking allows him to do that, which is very accessible to him now because he lives above a bar. But he goes to the bar knowing that he's going to have this painfulness of having talking to people. He allows himself to feel that pressure or anxiety to the fact, which is not something he normally does. He doesn't open himself to these possibilities until now. So we did this for about a year. He continues drawing these cartoons and now pornographic magazines to make money for his lifestyle. And he ends up meeting a 17-year-old girl who worked at a tobacco shop where he buys cigarettes, and she wants him to stop drinking for some reason. The prophecy, again, from the guy in high school, Takeshi, was like, if women will fall for you, they continue to fall for him. I don't know how old he is here. She's 17, so another possibly weird thing, but like, it's Japan in the 1930s. I don't know if anyone really cared. It's still weird, but you know, in the time of the text. And he talks a lot about this Russian writer was a big inspiration for the author and now the character. Talks about the quote, better be merry with the fruitful grape than sad and after none or bitter fruit, saying that he should indulge in alcohol. It makes him happy rather than have nothing or something that brings him pain. But the 17-year-old Japanese store worker doesn't know what this means. She doesn't care. And he finds, he in his own belief believes she's a virgin. And continuing to go to the shop, they form some sort of bond. And this idea of her being a virgin entices him, weirdly, but it's part of who he is. He ends up cutting himself after falling down a manhole. The 17-year-old girl saves him. Her name's Yoshiko. I'll call her that from now on rather than 17-year-old girl. And after seeing the cut, he thinks that he's going to cut down his drinking. He says, oh, from tomorrow on I won't drink anymore. And her wanting him to stop drinking, he's like, oh, really? And he says there's no doubt he'll give up drinking. If he gives it up, ask her to marry him. And she says yes. And they make a promise. And the next day he goes and breaks the round, so he spends it all drinking. He goes to Yoshiko and is like, sorry, I got drunk, you know, even though he never really intended to keep this promise. This is just something he did randomly. But she doesn't believe him. She thinks he's pretending to do this as a joke. He just like tells her, this is the truth, I'm not pretending, I was drinking. She's like, don't tease me, you know. And she takes his promise at face value. This promise he made last night when he was injured and drunk was the word of bond to her. Like, this was for sure set in stone. He's never going to break this. And she continues to believe that wholeheartedly. She has an innocent trust in whoever. and that is her downfall. I don't know about a downfall, her vice, I guess, eventually. But she is like a sign of purity to him. He sees her virginity as a holy sign to him. He marries her to know the great savage joy of being with the virgin. Disgusting. But yeah, he it's a turning point for him because he talks about partaking in savage joys will bring upon some sort of great sorrow. And this is the savage joy he wants to partake in. He wants to have this beautiful, sweet, sentimental relationship with a virgin girl and get married with her and go on bicycles to see waterfalls, you know? So they get married, and he realizes the joy wasn't really savage, but the suffering which did come was tremendous. It was a lot. So we're gonna get into that now. So this is approaching the end of the story. So after getting married, him and Yoshiko, let me see now, because they move somewhere. I'm trying to make sure I know. They get married, and they get an apartment on the Sanai River. He gives up drinking and fully devotes to drawing cartoons. He lives the storming the normal life. Like, they go for movies, they go to get flowers, but he enjoys just listening to her talk and whatnot. This is something he's openly expressing love and any emotion of attachment to a person, which is weird for him. And we'll see why it's weird soon. But eventually Horiki... Oh, sorry. Let me go back a little bit because he says something. He believes in a chance that in one of the days of his happiness he'll turn into a human being, which is insane for him to say because his entire novel I'm not human. Humans are weird. I'm scared of humans. I'm never going to be a human. You know, I can't relate to these people. They're so ostracized from myself. But then Horiki shows up and sort of crushes this, as Horiki at this point is sort of a connection to his old life that he doesn't enjoy. He wants to be detached from, but Horiki just keeps being around. So Horiki visits and he's about to talk about his old wife back home. And he asks if for permission to say it in front of his new wife, but he talks about how he's told his new wife about all of his old relations, and she doesn't care. She holds this blind trust. This is her defining factor. And he asks protagonist to visit his old wife every now and then. Then, after being in a state of non-drinking, Horiki and him go for a drink because it's the only way of, I guess, deflecting the past, you know? So him and Horiki then, they keep hanging out, they keep seeing each other. He's living this life, but now he's drinking again. Sells, again, his new wife's clothes at a pawn shop to lend Horiki money. Back to doing these terrible things he did with his old wife. It didn't last for long of him thinking he was human or caring, whatnot. Because the protagonist never has a revelation. He will go through spouts of where you think is like, oh, okay, he's turned his life around here. He's going to become a human. The book's called No Longer Human. Maybe he will eventually view himself as human, and these connections allow them in his life. But no, he doesn't allow that sort of revelation. I think it's because the author himself never came to that sort of revelation. This is the last book he made before he committed suicide. And I think he wants to make it known that he himself and his characters, they don't fit this typical narrative of, oh, I go through terrible struggles and come out better, bigger, a new person. He goes through struggles and continues to struggle and struggle and struggle to part of his own fault of not reaching out for connections, but also just the terrible life he's been forced into. He was assaulted presumably assaulted as a child. He never got the mental help he needed for whatever condition he has that doesn't allow him to feel these emotions that most people do. And him and Haruki then play a game. They talk about a game. I'm trying to figure out what it actually was. It's a pretty strange one. Okay, it's a game about a tragic and comic noun. So he's like, oh, tobacco is a tragic noun. Medicine is like injections are tragic, stuff like that. And they go on talking about these nouns and whatnot. And they go to talk about cartoonist. And Haruki says it's tragic. And the protagonist says that tragic's a good description. Or sorry, it's the other way around. The protagonist says it's a tragic noun, and Haruki says extremely tragic's a better description for the protagonist. Which is weird because Haruki seems to find the positives in his life, but as they go on and on and on, like after visiting his house and then leaving his wife and this new 17-year-old he's with, the Yoshiko, I think he sees the detriments in the protagonist, and instead of helping him, he just lets them go by. Haruki isn't a good person either. He's not as bad as the protagonist, obviously, but he doesn't reach out to the protagonist in a helpful way either. So they go on with the game, and they go to another game where instead of synonyms, they talk about antonyms of words. The antonym of black is white, the antonym of white is red. And they go on and on down to... There's an important one. Prius asks for the antonym of Maso Haruki, his friend. Then they're not laughing anymore. Like, this game has become something quite serious. And then trying to find a more important word they talk about here. So they talk about crime, and they go on about what would be the antonym to crime. Haruki says law, but they disagree on this fact, saying that crime goes into a different category. Then he says that it would be God. But again, that's not deep enough for the protagonist. It's not the proper antonym to the word. And they say it's a virtue. A virtuous citizen is someone who cannot commit crime. But then he says virtue is antonym of vice, obviously, not crime. And he views vice and crime as different, which, fair enough. Crime, it's more defined by laws. Vice is your own shortcomings, defined by anything you want, really. And they divulge from the conversation. He's like, oh, well, it must be God. If you're with God, you can't be wrong. You can't have crime. And then Haruki says he's hungry. Yoshiko's cooking beans downstairs. The protagonist doesn't go downstairs and get them. Something important's coming up. I'm trying to take it slow and in order. So then he, as he goes downstairs to get the beans, he views crime and punishment as antonyms to each other. Another title of a work by the Russian writer I think he likes. And he's like, oh, maybe he'd put these side by side, not as synonyms, but as antonyms, crime and punishment. which I don't know if I can fully understand myself, but I guess it's in the sense that a person who commits a crime doesn't ever think of the punishment or doesn't believe they can be punished. Crime is the opposite of punishment because in doing crime you don't believe you require punishment. That's what I think it is, but it's probably deeper than that or something else, but that's what I got from it. So then Haruki comes back upstairs without getting the beans and gets the protagonist to get up with him. They go downstairs and his wife is being sexually assaulted by a man. And to this, the protagonist says, this is just another aspect of the behavior of human beings. There's nothing to be surprised at. Which is insane. This guy is a piece of shit. His wife is being sexually assaulted due to her blind trust in others, and he doesn't do anything. Haruki clears his throat, and that startles the guy and makes him head out. But he does nothing to this. It's so insane how little he cares for these people around him, even though the 17-year-old girl married him on a whim and believes everything he says. And Haruki too, because he saw it, went upstairs and got the protagonist and got him to come down and look at it before stopping it. Both of them. Just this scene removes any positivity I had for their character until this point. But it works in a story sense, his reaction as it go on. So let me just familiarize myself with what I want to say. So he finds that like the dread in this happening is not something that can be expressed so simply. It's like encountering God himself at a shrine. You know, it's petrifying for him to have experienced, like visually experienced this thing, knowing it's going on. And he ends up having gray hair from that night. It's so stressful for him, but it wasn't stressful enough for him to act out and stop it. You know, he just keeps up the act of not caring. He's like, oh, it's something humans do. I don't care. To his friend Haruki. But deep down, you know, it startled him so badly that he had physical alterations. He lost all joy in himself, hopes for things in the worlds, which is so selfish of him. He takes this incident as a stab to him, but at the same time, he doesn't, you know, blame her for like cheating, because which is something he brings up, which is insane, because she's not cheating; she was sexually assaulted. But he goes on, he's talking about it. His friend Haruhi says you should forgive himself because he's not much of a prize himself. Forgive Yoshiko because he's not a prize himself, which is insane. Because what is there to forgive her for? She didn't do anything, but they're both awful people. So he goes back to drinking. He cries, and Yoshiko brings the protagonist a plate of beans, saying that he told me he wouldn't do anything, and protagonist comforts her in some sense. He says like, oh, it's all right, you didn't do anything, you don't know to have distrust for others, because she doesn't. This is the whole reason she got into this mess, is because she is so blindly trusting of people. So they sit down, they have the beans, whatnot. He talks about who the man was, the relations to him, which aren't super important. But he felt less hatred for the man who assaulted his wife than he did for Haruki. He really hates Haruki from now, because the fact that he went down there, found them doing it, came up and got him. Like, it's so insane. Why would someone want to show such a horrible sight? And then he goes on saying like he never forgives his wife, but he doesn't refuse to give her because he doesn't believe he has that authority in the relationship. He doesn't believe. He goes on talking about how if a husband didn't forgive his wife for something like this, he'd just divorce and be done with it. Or if he forgives her, then they just move on and he forgives her. Again, not something you need to be forgiven for, but that's how it works because of the story. But he doesn't view himself as having this authority in the relationship. He doesn't view himself having this authority as her husband. And he repeatedly, throughout the next couple of pages, asks like God is trustfulness a sin, because he's so astonished that her blind trust could be used so cruelly against her. Let me move on to another point. Okay, so he goes like more and more depressed, thinking that due to her blind trust, she's been with more men who have taken advantage of her, which is insane that he gets mad about that. But just more and more depressed. He comes home looking for sugar water. He opens the bowl of sugar and finds pills and sleeping pills. He decides now it's time for his second suicide attempt. He stashed them there in case he needed them at some point to commit suicide. And he decides tonight's the night. He takes them all, lies down, and for 3 days he goes into a coma. But he ends up waking up. And the words he speaks when he wakes up are, "I'm going home," which shows his longing for any care in his family or his father or his home, which is so weird because the disconnect between him and his home is so great. He barely speaks about like his father or his brothers or his home throughout the book past his childhood, other than, "Oh, my dad hates me," or "My brothers are not proud of me." But for some reason, the first thing he says when he wakes up is he wants to go home. And after he wakes up, he wants to be away from his wife. He wants to be away from women entirely, because I guess he's at this point conscious of the sorrow he brings to others, specifically women, whenever he's with them. But this wish will come back to him at some point. So he ends up throwing up blood in the snow one night, and this leads him to want to get medicine to better his conditions. So he goes to a pharmacy and meets this disabled woman there who works there, gets some medicine for like to be a better, more healthy, and eventually he gets morphine to stave off his cravings for alcohol, which is insane, but it's the medicine that was there at the time. He injects the morphine and loves it. Obviously, it's morphine. He moves on from alcohol to an addiction to morphine, which much more serious, obviously. And he racks up this debt at the pharmacy, begs her for it. He ends up kissing and hooking up with the pharmacy worker just to get her to give him more morphine. So again, cheating on his wife, without any thought for her, because he's still with Yoshiko. And Yoshiko believes this morphine is just for an energy boost. That's what he tells her. And again, she's so blindly believing that she thinks that, oh, this is good for him. He needs this. And she'll show this later on. And eventually, through his addiction, it just gets worse and worse. He wants to die more and more, and decides that he's going to kill himself. He's going to take 10 shots of morphine and jump off a bridge. But every time he's killed himself, it's been at the end of a year. And Flatfish, the guy he used to live with, caught on to this. So they come to visit him at the end of the year. Coincidentally, on the day he chooses he was going to die. And they take him away, and he goes with them. He goes to a hospital, a mental facility. And as he gets to the mental facility, he's checked in. Yoshiko offers him the bag of morphine and needles, still thinking that this morphine is an energy medicine for him. It helps him be a better person. Yoshiko's just such a terribly tragic person. She believes everything at face value. She believed he wasn't drunk when he was drunk in front of her. She believes that no man is going to harm her when proven men want to harm her. She believes that the protagonist is this innocent, joyful person, just aided by the morphine that keeps him going. But for the first time, he refuses something. When he gets in, he says no to the morphine. And as a kid, as growing up, he never refuses things because he doesn't want to start an argument or make a person feel bad for offering him something. But he allows himself to feel something. He allows himself to refuse something for once in his life, which opens himself to emotion from the other person and the possible disagreement they could have. So going to this asylum, he then labels himself again. He's a reject of society. He's a failure. You know, it doesn't bring him joy, but it brings him some sort of safety. You know, away from all his addictions. Then about 3 months in, his brother and Flatfish come to take him out of the asylum, and he finds out his father died the end of the last month. His brother offers him lodging somewhere outside of Tokyo. He wants him to be outside the city and start a life fresh in the country. So his father's death hits him deeply. He loses that frightening presence that kept him fearful of what he did in life. He loses that connection. Suffering, you know, his dad's discontent for his lifestyle and who he was brought him suffering, but he lost that suffering. Now he doesn't even have that to feel. So he ends up moving in this place outside. Lives there for years. He lives with this servant he would argue with every now and then. They never really got along. She ends up getting him laxatives instead of sleeping pills. Makes him pissed off, but he just knows that he's a reject. He knows that this idea he's been to a mental institution. He's doesn't have any value for himself still, and doesn't have the value to bicker with her, to tell her, oh, these are wrong. He's like, oh, I must deserve this. I'm a reject. And he accepts that the one true thing he knows is that everything passes in life. There's never a permanent thing. And he talks about how gray his hair is. So that's the end of his story. There's an epilogue I'll get into after, but I think overall the message is to not be like this person. It describes how the author's life was and how he projects himself onto this character, feeling completely disconnected from society, from a kid to an adult, and that brings with a lot of complications, because to be disconnected from society, you can think, oh, they're so depressed, they don't have any connections, it's so sad for them. But at the same time, they're so disconnected and apathetic that they're terrible people. He's so disconnected and apathetic that when his wife is raped, he can't fathom any care for her. He thinks about himself. He's like, oh, what if she's cheating with other men? Or, oh, I can't forgive her. He's so selfish, and his own depression leads him to never form any real connections. He might form a connection, but he breaks it in the next 5 minutes. You know, he resorts to alcohol. He ends up on morphine. He doesn't do anything positive for himself, and that's his main problem. You can feel sympathy for him, but he never does something positive for himself. He never tries to better himself. And even like in his suicide attempts, you know, he doesn't go through with it. Like, he goes through with it in attempts, but he never puts his effort into anything. Even in suicide, you know, he gets saved from the river, or the pills aren't enough, and it shows in his career. He never put effort into being an artist, even though he says he wanted to be so bad. He never put effort to any relationships. He never put effort to anything, which is why he didn't get anything out of life. There's no positive message to be found in the book, but in seeing how terrible the protagonist is, it can make yourself see a message of, I need to not be like this. That's sort of what I took about the book. That while I can relate to this person in some ways, I'm not some seriously depressed or like traumatized person, but you know, like, the feeling of not understanding social norms, not understanding why we have to do this monotonous task out day after day, waking up, eating 3 meals, go to work, live in this society. Despite all that, there is good to be found. There is reasons to keep going. There's things to do. There's things you can bring yourself to do, but he fails to do that. And the message is, in my opinion, that you need to bring yourself to understand the betterness in this world. So there's an epilogue of a man who meets the owner of the bar that the protagonist stayed above for a while, and she ended up getting the notebooks he wrote, which is this book, mailed to her, and she gives the notebooks to him. And he stays up all night reading them. They're so interesting to him, and he asked her to keep them so he can publish them. And they discussed, they both read them. So he asked her, did she cry when she read them? And says no. She just keeps thinking that when humans get the way the protagonist did, they're no good for anything, which is true. The protagonist wasn't good for anyone for anything. He didn't bring joy to anyone's life. He brought sorrow to everyone around him. That's because he got that way. He didn't allow himself to be better. But then they agree that he did suffer. He suffered a lot. Being assaulted as a child, that's something that's just going to stay with you forever. It's going to define parts of your life, but you can't fault him for that, but you can fault him for so many other things that it makes it kind of a balance between sympathetic and angry towards who he is. And they say, if everything in the notebooks is true, I probably would have wanted to put him into an asylum as well. And the bartender woman states that what happened was his father's fault. And again, I think that's the part where you can sympathize with him. His father didn't ever see his discontent for life, didn't ever see, as a child, he never wanted anything. He was so much different from his siblings. He never enjoyed being around, he never asked for gifts, he never asked for anything. And his father didn't take notice of that. And then when he gets older, he'd attempt suicide, which, was like, my son attempted suicide. Maybe I should spend time with him. Maybe I should get to know him. Maybe I should help him. And he doesn't reach out for help either. But as a father, to your child, maybe you should help him. But he just gets angry with him. And that constant fear, it brought some emotion to his life. It was never any good. And then he said, she said, that if only he didn't become an alcoholic, which that was the start of a downward spiral, most definitely. But she said even though he did drink, he was a good boy, an angel, which is that's the final line of the book, which is so weird to say because of who he was. But this book is told from the perspective of his mind. And I think in it, the reason I and maybe any other readers would view him as such a terrible person is because we're seeing the recollections of a depressed and highly traumatized person's mind. He doesn't see any of the good himself. He can't see any of the positivity he brings. We get the one mention of that, the daughter of his old wife saying that, oh, you're such a nice person, why wouldn't God listen to you? Maybe there was the fact that the protagonist and the author has so many great things about him, so many things that people love about him, but he doesn't see that because he doesn't believe he's human. He doesn't believe he has these connections, but maybe they're there and he just doesn't see them. So someone outward, like the bartender, can see that, oh, he is a great person, which as a reader, this guy watched his wife get raped. He cannot be a great person. But maybe outside of that, these bad things he sees himself, which he does terrible things. He is a terrible person, but there are good parts of him. And that line has so much in it that I think, as a reader, you need to know that if you're experiencing something like this, you can only see the bad in yourself. But that doesn't mean there isn't good there. Just because you don't experience any good in your own being doesn't mean people around you don't. So maybe when he was not drinking, him and Yoshiko would have been so happy with him. or his old wife when he was just taking care of his daughter. You know, they might have seen so much good in this guy, or his friends when he was a child and clowning, even though it was a faked act, they loved it. But he can't see the good himself, so he needed to reach out to these people to show him the good. But he just never did, and that's his main flaw. He never reaches out. He never attempts to better himself, and unfortunately, just ends with him living in the countryside, gray hair from his traumatic life, living with a servant who doesn't care for him. He doesn't care for her. You can't call it a sad ending. It's almost a neutral ending. I guess it shows his discontent or disengagement with everything, that he doesn't end up in jail or mental asylum for his life. He ends up in this stagnant, almost purgatory. Like, he doesn't believe in heaven, but he believes in hell, but maybe at this point doesn't believe in either. And he's just in this stagnant state of nothingness. I think that's all I have to say. This is very long. If someone actually watches this to the end, crazy. I'm going to post it on my Instagram, so if you're from there, I probably know you. Thank you. If you found this on YouTube, weird, but cool. Thank you for listening.